Welcome back to the YouTube channel Doctor's Wisdom Share. Today, I want to lead into our topic in a slightly more down-to-earth way, because in truth, bad breath has never been a small or trivial issue. When I talk about bad breath, I often begin with a fable that I believe many people have either read before or heard somewhere at some point. The story is called The Lion with Bad Breath. There was once a lion who began to suspect that his breath smelled bad. He truly suspected it. He genuinely worried about it, and so he began asking others. First, he asked the goat. The goat was honest, completely honest. As soon as the lion asked, the goat replied, "Yes, your majesty, your breath really does smell bad." When the lion heard this, he felt deeply embarrassed. But the lion's embarrassment did not stop at embarrassment. He immediately turned around and ate the goat. Then he went on to ask the monkey. The monkey was more cunning. He had seen the goat get eaten. He was afraid. He understood that honesty meant death. So as soon as the lion finished asking, the monkey answered right away, "No, your majesty does not have bad breath at all." The lion listened and then thought that the monkey was sly, flattering, and insincere. And so he ate the monkey as well. Then came the third animal, the fox. This fox was smarter and more clever. He understood that saying yes would get him killed, and saying no would also get him killed. He thought quickly and replied, "I have a cold. My nose is blocked. I can't smell anything, so I don't know." And the fox survived. This story may sound like a children's tale, but it contains a great deal of life philosophy. It speaks about behavior, communication, social dynamics, and human relationships. And in fact, its content is also loosely connected to today's topic, bad breath. I may have told the story at some length, in a once-upon-a-time style, but it serves to illustrate something important. In a workplace, the boss may be like the lion, or like a king. Each employee has a different personality and a different way of working. Some people are like the goat, some are like the monkey, some are like the fox. This fable teaches us how to deal with people, how to speak, how to behave, so that life becomes more breathable, being favored more, being helped more, being recognized more, being promoted more, things like that. But let us return to today's topic, bad breath. I want to be very honest with you. Bad breath has never been a simple issue. It is not the kind of thing where you can just say, "Oh well, just brush your teeth and it's done." I've spent a long time talking about this topic, through many conversations and many stories. I believe there will be moments when you cannot help but laugh, but after the laughter fades, you realize how serious it actually is. To make it easier to follow, I will divide the content into 4 parts. The first part, what bad breath is. The second part, pathophysiology, histopathology, mechanisms, and causes of bad breath. The third part, diagnosis show to know whether you have bad breath and how to assess it. The fourth part, treatment. And let me add just a little more context. I am not speaking casually or without research. There is a very large meta-analysis that reviewed 584 studies on halitosis. The conclusion was that approximately 30% of the population is affected. This proportion is increasing, and it is not uniform across countries. To help you visualize this, some statistics from the United States show that around 50 million people suffer from chronic bad breath. Americans spend about $1 billion on oral care products such as mouthwash, and around $9 billion on tongue scrapers and toothpaste to deal with this issue. On average, each American with bad breath spends an additional $400 per year. And yet, breath still smells. It may sound humorous, but it is the kind of humor that leaves a bitter aftertaste. And while Americans struggle with bad breath in various ways, other countries are not doing any better. For example, in Germany, according to data I have seen, 1 in 5 people has permanent bad breath. What about France? The French are known for elegance and refinement, right? Yet 50 to 60% experience severe bad breath from time to time, and in some cases, halitosis cannot be cured. In ancient Jewish society, bad breath was considered a legitimate reason for divorce. It was literally written into the law. And honestly, if such a regulation were enforced today, I suspect divorce rates in many places would rise dramatically, whether exponentially or otherwise. I am not sure, but they would certainly increase. From my own observations, about 3 out of every 10 people have noticeable bad breath, and the majority of them are men. Just a few numbers, but they are enough to show one thing clearly: bad breath is not a trivial matter. At this point, I want to go straight to a very direct question: how severe can bad breath actually be, and what consequences can it cause? I am a practicing physician who examines patients daily. To me, a hospital is a miniature society. I also carry a great many mental statistics with me. I am not someone who conducts research every day, but I have taught research methodology before, so I understand the value of statistical observation. As I mentioned earlier, from my experience, about 3 out of 10 people have bad breath that is clearly noticeable, sometimes extremely severe. Why do I notice it so clearly? Because patients come in every day. I stand close to them. I ask questions. I listen. I examine them. There are moments when either family members stand behind them, or the conversation drags on longer than usual, and honestly, I just wish the consultation would end quickly. Even my colleagues share similar experiences. Anesthesiologists, for example, emergency and intensive care doctors, when they insert an endotracheal tube, their faces are extremely close to the patient's face. Their noses are very close to the patient's mouth. They are constantly exposed to bad breath. Ophthalmologists experience it, and doctors experience it as well. These are the professionals who work at the closest range and the most frequently, and they understand very clearly how severe bad breath can be. So as I said, bad breath is not a simple issue. There is a reason researchers conducted a meta-analysis of 584 studies and concluded that 32% of the world's population is affected, with differences between countries. Such studies are not done without reason. And I want to add one more very important point. Bad breath can be so serious that even in ancient Jewish society, it was formalized into law as a legitimate reason for divorce. It was recognized as a valid cause for couples to separate. In reality, I have also seen quite a few couples break up or experience constant tension in their relationship simply because of bad breath. In many cases, they genuinely cannot live together anymore. There are even situations where I have had to counsel patients about sexual aversion. Some couples come to me because of intimacy problems. The husband complains, "I don't understand why my wife has become more and more distant, more and more cold." But when I speak to both of them and gradually uncover the details, it turns out that the husband has severe bad breath, and the wife simply cannot tolerate it. In some cases, I have even had to suggest certain intimate positions which people casually call the spooning position as a temporary workaround. Only then could the issue be partially managed. I say this very directly so you understand. Bad breath is extremely serious. Building on the story of the lion with bad breath, I want to tell you another story to show that bad breath is not just a matter of embarrassment. It can alter the course of a person's entire life. Some of you, especially those who studied the humanities or literature, or at least have an interest in literary history, may know that during the early Tang dynasty in China, there was a group of famous poets known as the four literary giants of the early Tang. Among these four figures, there was one poet who was particularly important, someone who helped lay the foundation for early Tang poetry. His name was Song Zhuan. Song Zhuan had a notable trait. He was exceptionally handsome, tall, well-built, possessing all the physical qualities associated with a strong and imposing man. He was also intelligent and highly talented. Not only was he gifted in poetry, but he was also capable in politics. He was regarded as an exceptionally sharp mind and a promising political figure of his time. However, Song Zhuan had another trait tone that became the key to this story. He harbored a secret, passionate love for Wu Zetian. At that time, Wu Zetian had not yet become the first and also the last male emperor of China. Long before she ascended the throne, Song Zhuan was already deeply in love with her. He loved her to the extent that he resolved, by any means necessary, to conquer the heart of this woman. He was especially captivated by her large, expressive eyes. He carried that image into his poetry and wrote many love poems, 5-character verse dedicated to Wu Zetian. Later, when Wu Zetian became empress, she immediately summoned Song Zhuan to the palace. As we know, Wu Zetian had a strong preference for handsome and talented men. Whenever possible, she invited such men into the palace. And yes, there were intimate encounters. Song Xuan was no exception. Now comes the part 1 recount in the closest possible rhythm to the original, because it is both painfully real and deeply bitter. On the very first day Wu Zixin was officially crowned empress, she instructed the palace guards as follows: that evening, if they saw a tall, handsome man wearing silk night garments entering the palace, they were to let him pass without question. That was all. Song Xuan entered. At that moment, Wu Zixin was already lying on the bed, waiting. Song Xuan brought with him the poems he had cherished, refined, and carefully prepared over many years, intending to read them aloud to her. And he possessed a powerful weapon, one that easily captivated listeners, his voice. Song Xuan's reading voice was exceptionally beautiful, warm, expressive, and compelling. Combined with the fact that he was a gifted orator of his era, his delivery was mesmerizing. He became absorbed. He believed that simply by reading his poetry like this, he would win Wu Zixin's heart. But he did not expect what happened next. Less than 15 minutes later, Wu Zixin could no longer tolerate the smell spreading throughout the room. In the end, she pushed Song Xuan out of the chamber, and as he stepped outside, overwhelming shame washed over him. Here was a man filled with confidence, who believed his poetic talent and intellectual brilliance could conquer one of the most famous women in China, a country that at the time was considered the center of the universe. And yet he failed. And that failure was not because his poetry was poor, not because he was unattractive, not because he lacked talent. It was because of bad breath. The pain was so intense that as he walked through the imperial garden, he came upon a lilac tree. You may know the saying that bad breath is something no scent can truly overpower. Yet lilac is known as a flower capable of masking many foul odors. And yet, cruelly enough, even these two combined were not enough. Song Xuan walked up to the lilac tree, picked a handful of flowers, and stuffed them into his mouth. A full handful, stuffed completely in, to the point that I describe it as a deeply painful image. Even the fragrance of lilac flowers could not overcome the stench of his breath when it had reached such an extreme level. And so, he failed in that love. When I tell this story, I often joke, but the humor is meant to underscore the seriousness of the issue. If Song Xuan had not suffered from bad breath, who knows how Chinese history might have changed. These were two extraordinarily talented individuals. Had they truly come together, history could have taken a very different path. That is why I want to emphasize that the topic of bad breath, which I am discussing with you today, is something we should take seriously and examine thoroughly. Only with proper knowledge and understanding can we address it. Otherwise, we may encounter tragedies like Song Xuan's story, or like the fable of the lion with bad breath, where the goat is killed, the monkey is killed, and only the fox survives. I have even heard people joke, if there were a time machine, I would ship him a bottle of mouthwash. Who knows, history might have changed. I laugh when I hear that. But after laughing, I realize how ironically true it is. Something that seems small can be powerful enough to derail something enormous. And I return to my narrative rhythm. I ask myself a direct question. Could bad breath truly be a disease, or is it merely a symptom? In medicine, we often say this: a collection of signs forms a symptom. Multiple symptoms form a syndrome. Multiple syndromes form a disease. So are bad breath the disease? I will answer immediately. In medical terminology, using the English term, it is called halitosis. You may translate it as bad breath disease or bad breath condition. Both are acceptable. Why the term halitosis? It comes from two components. First, the Latin prefix halit, referring to breath specifically, breath with an unpleasant odor. Second, the suffix -isis, which indicates a pathological condition. A Latin prefix combined with a Greek suffix forms the term. Therefore, when we talk about halitosis, we are fully justified in calling it either a condition or a disease. Today, there is even an International Halitosis Association. There are studies, classifications, and pathological frameworks. And once something is defined as a disease, it necessarily involves definitions, causes, mechanisms, pathology, pathophysiology, symptoms, diagnosis, treatment, and prevention. If we followed a traditional medical lecture structure, this topic would be extremely far too long to fit into a short program. That is why I say this plainly. I am not delivering a formal lecture. I am going to explain it in a more real-life way, structured so that anyone can understand. And once we finish the first part with bad breath, we move on to the second part, pathophysiology, mechanisms, and causes. Because after telling the story of Song Juan, I cannot help but feel regret. In his time, there were no toothbrushes, no modern understanding of bad breath, and so, his love for musicians slipped through his fingers. And I would like you to imagine something very simple. You are young, you have a date, the two of you are about to share what you imagine will be a sweet kiss, and suddenly, you catch an unpleasant smell coming from the other person. What would you do? Continue? Say something? Say nothing? End the relationship? Or pretend nothing happened? Of course, no one is perfect. What truly matters is whether we can accept it and whether the situation can be changed. But to be honest, very few people find it comfortable to stay in an environment filled with bad breath. At this point, I move straight to a question I am often asked. What is the true nature of bad breath? Let me answer it this way. Song Juan was extraordinarily talented, yet bad breath affected not only his love life, but also his career. A person with bad breath, no matter how talented, will encounter many obstacles in life. Obstacles at work, in social relationships, in business, in friendships, and especially with partners and loved ones. Let me share a story from not long ago to show you just how real this can be. A woman once came to confide in me. She said, "I am very sad. For many years, I focused entirely on my career. I was not blessed with great looks. I placed my career above everything else. I am now over 30, and I have never had a serious relationship." Then one day, she met a man online through Facebook. They talked and got along extremely well. They felt as if they were already in love. They even thought about marriage, despite never having met in person. Eventually, they arranged to go see a movie together. It was a very popular film, difficult to get tickets for. The man bought the tickets, and they agreed to meet at the cinema entrance. They met. They greeted each other warmly. But she told me, "I noticed a faint smell. Something felt off." Once they sat down inside the theater, the smell became stronger. At first, she thought perhaps someone nearby had passed gas. She assumed it would pass, but the longer she sat there, the stronger the smell became. The movie was excellent, but she could not focus on it at all. She was completely preoccupied with figuring out where the smell was coming from. Eventually, she suspected that it was coming from the man. Gathering all her courage, she leaned closer to his machine. She smelled something unbearable. It was coming directly from his mouth. She asked him, "Is something wrong with you?" He replied, "Nothing is wrong with me. Everything is fine." And indeed, he was handsome, had a good job, and lived a stable life. But she remained haunted by the experience for an entire week. She imagined the future sleeping in the same bed, facing each other, kissing, and she could not bear the thought of what that would be like. In the end, she decided there would be no second meeting. She returned to her previous life, alone. I tell this story to make one point clear. The smell of bad breath is not trivial. It can sever relationships very quickly. Now, let us return to your question. Where does bad breath come from, and why does it occur? I will explain it in the simplest way possible. All odors, by their nature, are composed of chemical substances. These substances are volatile. They form tiny particles that float in the air. When we inhale them, our sense of smell detects them. Bad breath is the same. It consists of volatile chemical compounds released from certain substances. Researchers have studied and classified these extensively, but to make it easier to understand, I divide them into three main groups. The first group, odors that come directly from the food and drinks we consume. Onions, garlic, fermented shrimp paste, foods with strong odors. Alcohol as well. Alcohol contains ketones, aldehydes, and acetic acid. When combined, they create an unpleasant smell. The person drinking may find it fragrant or intoxicating, but for someone sitting nearby, inhaling that exhaled breath can be overwhelming. Many of you have probably had to clean up vomit from a husband or a friend who drank too much. The smell of vomit from someone who is intoxicated is absolutely unbearable. Even a dog, no matter how hungry, will refuse to eat it. I place all of this into the first group, strongly scented foods and beverages. Let me be honest about my own habits. I love pho and I love onions, but I only eat those foods on weekends when I do not have to work, appear on programs, or interact closely with others. I would never eat them in the morning because I have to see patients. I do not dare to consume strongly scented foods when I know I will be in close contact with people. The second group, odors caused by bacteria in the mouth breaking down organic compounds, producing a pungent, ammonia-like smell. Specifically, bacteria break down amino acids. These amino acids come from food, dental plaque, fragments of shed oral mucosal cells, and the surface of the tongue. When amino acids are broken down, they produce ammonia smell similar to urine. This type of odor is unpleasant, but it usually does not reach an extreme level. The third group is the most frightening group that produces extremely severe bad breath. This odor is caused by bacteria producing volatile sulfur compounds. Hydrogen sulfide HS produces the smell of rotten eggs. Other compounds create odors resembling feces, flatulence, or sewage. When combined, they form a stench that is nearly impossible to tolerate. The deeper cause is bacterial breakdown of proteins, especially involving two amino acids, cysteine and methionine. These are found in meat, fish, seafood, and even plant proteins such as soybeans, peanuts, and legumes. When oral hygiene is poor, combined with the presence of anaerobic gram-negative bacteria in the mouth, these proteins are broken down and the resulting breath can be truly horrifying. So in summary, the pathophysiological mechanism falls into these three groups. At this point, whenever I mention the third group, one with the most intense odor, people often latch onto one word immediately: bacteria. Some say, so it's bacteria. And then they begin searching for the exact names of bacteria, reading scientific terms until their tongues twist. When I hear this, I speak frankly. That approach is unnecessary. Anyone who has studied bacteria or viruses even a little knows that there are an enormous number of species. Classification helps, but in reality, there are countless varieties. What matters is not obsessively identifying the exact bacterial species. What matters is understanding what the bacteria are breaking down, where they are living, and how they produce odor. I once joked in a previous episode that when you wake up in the morning, there are about 700 species of bacteria in your mouth, totaling roughly 50 billion bacteria. People are often shocked by that. Then they ask, so how many bacteria are there in the human body overall? Let me explain. There was a massive research projectively funded aimed at determining how many bacteria live on the human body. The results surprised many people. The number of bacteria in the human body is approximately 10 times the number of human cells. A child's body contains about 30 trillion cells. An adult's body can contain up to 75 trillion cells. Multiply that by 10, and you get an enormous number. I share this to help you understand that bacteria are not something foreign. They are a world that lives alongside us. But let us return to our focus, bad breath. I will state this clearly. When we look at the source of bad breath, about 85% of cases originate from the oral cavity. And to make this easier to understand, I divide the oral cavity into two regions. The front oral cavity, the teeth. The back oral cavity, from the tongue backward, deep into the throat, including the tonsils and the palatal arches. The front region, teeth, can certainly cause odor, but the back region is the primary and most important source of bad breath. Why do I say this? Because in my daily clinical practice, I interact with patients constantly. In some cases, the moment a patient opens their mouth to speak, the odor is immediately noticeable. Problems with the teeth are familiar to everyone. Gingivitis, periodontitis, apical infections, cavity disease are mostly bacterial in origin. But the most problematic nest of odor is often located in the back, the tongue, the throat, and the tonsils. Look in the mirror. Stick out your tongue and examine it closely. You will see a coating on the tongue. For some people it is light, for others yellow, and for some it is thick and dirty. In medicine, there is a very classic description: dry lips, a coated tongue, and foul breath. In the past, doctors often used this description when documenting severe infections. This means that infection often manifests directly in the oral cavity, expressed through breath and the appearance of the tongue. That is why I repeat, The back of the oral cavity is the primary source. So what about the remaining 15%? Those come from other sources: the sinuses, the lower respiratory tract, the bronchi, the lungs, the stomach and esophagus, and even systemic diseases. Let me give you some examples. People with gastroesophageal reflux often notice a sour or acidic taste rising into the mouth. Their breath carries a sour, acidic smell. People with pyloric stenosis, or with conditions that cause food retention in the stomach, may have food that stagnates and is broken down by bacteria. This can produce a distinctly putrid odor that rises up. People with poorly controlled diabetes may have a breath odor that smells sweet or pungent, similar to halitosis is related to ketones. People with kidney failure may have a fishy, unpleasant odor on their breath. I do not want to overwhelm you with a long list. I only want to emphasize one key point. Different odors suggest different sources, but the majority still originate from the mouth. At this point, people often ask me, what about eating onions and garlic, smoking, drinking alcohol, or drinking too little water? Are these related? I answer immediately. Yes, they are closely related, especially water intake. I state this very clearly. Many cases of bad breath are caused by dry mouth. When the mouth is dry, bacteria have an opportunity to proliferate. That is why people who drink too little water often have bad breath. But drinking water also has its technique. I often say that you should drink a reasonable amount at a time, but throughout the day, whenever you feel your mouth becoming dry, you should take small sips to maintain moisture. This does not mean mindlessly sipping all day long, but being aware of when your mouth is dry and replenishing appropriately. Keeping the mouth from becoming excessively dry is a very important secret. What about alcohol? Alcohol causes cellular dehydration and dries the mouth very strongly. You can test this yourself. On days when you drink heavily, your breath the next day is often terrible. There are two layers to this problem. First, the stomach still contains ketones, aldehydes, and acids, which are exhaled and produce an unpleasant smell. Second, dry mouth leads to bacterial overgrowth, which further intensifies the odor. There are also some very ordinary daily habits that may sound strange, but are very real. Some people habitually keep their mouths open instead of closing them. When the mouth is open, moisture evaporates, the mouth becomes dry, and bacteria thrive. This is a habit that should be trained from childhood, keeping the mouth closed and breathing properly. In addition, protruding teeth or crowded teeth make oral hygiene more difficult. Plaque accumulates more easily, and the mouth is more likely to stay open, increasing the risk of bad breath. That is why I often say, if conditions allow, orthodontic treatment is beneficial. It is not only about aesthetics. It also improves hygiene, reduces plaque buildup, and reduces bacterial reservoirs. Some people then ask me, what about factors like staying up late, lack of exercise, or weakened immunity? I answer directly, yes, those matter as well. When immunity declines, the throat and oral cavity become more prone to inflammation. Bacterial balance is more easily disrupted, and odors become more severe. Staying up late, sleeping during the day, and being awake at night, disrupting daily routines, and avoiding physical activity, all of these weaken the body. When the body weakens, the bacterial ecosystem in the mouth becomes unbalanced. So to summarize, the essence is bacteria plus food debris and plaque in the mouth, combined with conditions that cause dry mouth and reduced immunity. At this point, I often hear a very everyday saying, stay too long in a smelly place, and you stop noticing the smell. Stay too long in a fragrant place, and you stop noticing the fragrance. And people often ask me, why don't people with bad breath realize it themselves? I answer, this is the most ironic part. I have met many people with severe bad breath who are extremely confident. They speak very close to my face, lean in very near, and they have absolutely no idea that they smell bad. There are two major mechanisms behind this. The first mechanism is olfactory fatigue or adaptation. Odors are volatile molecules that stimulate olfactory receptors. At first, the brain processes them strongly, but over time, the brain adapts and begins to ignore them. As a result, people who live in that odor for a long time no longer perceive it. The second mechanism is psychological perception. Let me give a very direct example. In a bathroom, the smell of feces or urine may be tolerable to the person who uses it regularly, but unbearable to someone who has just walked in. In other words, odors originating from one's own body are easily normalized by the brain, while odors from others are perceived more acutely. Sometimes, people with bad breath even criticize others for smelling bad, when in fact they themselves have severe bad breath. That is why I often warn, do not rush to judge others for bad breath. It may be that you are the one with bad breath, and do not realize it. So how can one recognize it oneself? I will be honest, there are a few methods, but none are absolutely foolproof. Method 1. The 30-second test. Use your tongue, specifically the deeper part of the tornado. Lick the back of your hand. Wait about 30 seconds for it to dry and concentrate, then smell it. If there is an odor, it suggests bad breath. Method 2. Tongue scraping. Use a tongue scraper or even a spoon. Scrape deep into the tongue coating, smear it onto your hand, let it dry, then smell it. Method 3. I will be frank, some people suggest getting very close to others to observe their reaction. This method can easily cause discomfort and should only be done with very close individuals, not casually. Then people ask, are there objective medical tests? Yes, there are many methods worldwide. Gas chromatography to measure volatile sulfur compounds, ammonia monitoring, saliva testing, and molecular biological techniques. But I will be honest again, bad breath is still underestimated. Many people assume their breath is fine and refuse to acknowledge that they have bad breath. Very few are brave enough to seek medical care specifically for this issue. When public awareness is low, healthcare systems are slow to incorporate it into routine protocols. In some places, there are even devices that function like breathalyzers, measuring breath odor to assess social interaction levels. I mention this to show how seriously some take the issue. That said, diagnosing bad breath does not require using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. In many cases, a careful clinical examination, detailed history taking about habits, underlying diseases, oral hygiene, dry mouth, and reflux is sufficient. In some countries, there is a simple examination method. The patient exhales through a tube, the doctor smells the other end, and assigns a score from 0 to 5. I hear this and think it is not an easy job for the doctor, but that is part of the work. As for me, in daily practice, simply listening to the breath, hearing the patient's descriptions, observing tongue coating, examining teeth and gums, and reviewing medical history already allows me to make a fairly accurate assessment. Now we arrive at the part everyone waits for the most: treatment. Now we come to the part everyone is most eager to hear: treatment. Some people like to tell long stories about the history of mouthwash, about how advertising drove massive sales. I understand what they are trying to say, that advances in science and technology have changed oral care habits. But I will say this very frankly, the idea that using mouthwash instantly takes you from hell to heaven is an exaggeration created by marketing. That said, the role of scientific progress is real. For example, toothbrushes have existed since ancient times. Later came toothpaste, tongue scrapers, and mouthwash. All of these tools contribute to addressing a problem of which 85% originates directly in the oral cavity. And I want to make one point very clear. If you want to treat bad breath, you must go directly to the main source of mouth, especially the back of the oral cavity. Honestly, whenever I talk about treatment, I am reminded of a very real-life story, one that is almost unbelievable. There are people who are so lazy about brushing their teeth that when I hear their stories, I can hardly believe them. Once there was a man living in the capital city. He spoke well, worked as a government official, and seemed perfectly respectable. And yet he told me, word for word, cows and buffaloes don't brush their teeth, and they're fine. When I heard that, I could only sigh. Not because the statement was funny, but because of the consequences it led to. He was handsome. Everything else in his life was good. But he was lazy about brushing his teeth. And in the end, his partner left him. Truly left him. Not because he was poor, not because of infidelity, but because of bad breath. It sounds like a small thing, but it destroyed an entire marriage. That is why I say, the simplest things are often the most important. Brushing your teeth. But brushing here does not mean brushing just to say you did. It means brushing correctly, and at the right times. Some people brush only once a day. Some brush only in the morning. Some brush only at night. I genuinely do not understand why people try to save effort in this area. Brushing your teeth costs nothing. As for me, I will be honest. After I eat, I want to brush my teeth. I brush when I wake up. I brush before going to bed. After meals, if conditions allow, I brush. Because I know this, when food residue remains, plaque remains, bacteria have something to break down, and odor will rise. Then I move on to something many people overlook, tongue scraping. I said it at the very beginning of the program. The main source of bad breath is the back of the oral cavity. And in that back region, the tongue is a major reservoir. The tongue's mucosa sheds every day. Tongue coating accumulates. Bacteria live there. That is why tongue scraping is not a cosmetic trick. It is cleaning the correct area. Some people focus intensely on brushing their teeth, but never scrape their tongue or clean the back region. In those cases, the odor remains unchanged. Then there is the throat, the tonsils, the palatal arches. I will say this directly, do not let them become chronically inflamed. Some people have persistent sore throats. Some have tonsils with deep crypts that trap food debris and caseous material. The odor that arises from this is very distinctive and extremely unpleasant. If left untreated, mouthwash may only freshen the surface briefly, before everything returns to the same state. The root remains the same. Reduce inflammation, maintain hygiene, and if there is a clear medical condition, consult the appropriate specialist for proper treatment. I now return to what I consider one of the most valuable daily habits, drinking water. Dry mouth is an ideal environment for bacteria. As I have said, people who drink too little water often have bad breath. The irony is that many people with bad breath also drink coffee, smoke, or consume alcohol, things that further dry the mouth. I am not saying these must be absolutely forbidden. I am saying that once you understand the mechanism, you must know how to compensate and adjust. Keep the mouth moist. Reduce dryness. Reduce the living space for bacteria. Some people then ask me, is mouthwash necessary? My answer is yes, but do not idolize it. Mouthwash helps reduce bacteria and temporarily reduce odor. But if your teeth are dirty, your tongue is coated, your throat is inflamed, plaque is abundant, cavities are present, or gums are inflamed, and you rely solely on mouthwash, then it is like mopping the floor while garbage is still being dumped in the middle of the room. Mechanical cleaning, brushing, flossing if possible, and tongue scraping remains the foundation. I also want to touch on a topic many people avoid, orthodontics. Protruding teeth, crowded teeth, and abnormal bites make oral hygiene more difficult. Plaque accumulates easily. These individuals are more prone to bad breath, gingivitis, and cavities. So if conditions allow, orthodontic treatment is an investment. It is not only cosmetic. It helps reduce plaque retention and bacterial reservoirs. And I want to emphasize something I often say in consultations. Parents should pay attention when children are young. Do not wait until teeth become severely misaligned before reacting. At this point, some people challenge me because I speak frankly. Orthodontic treatment is most effective when done early. Under the age of 16 is ideal. Between 16 and 25 is still feasible. After 25, it is still possible, but honestly, the results are not as dramatic as people imagine. I see many people starting orthodontic treatment at 30, 35, even 37. I am not saying it should not be done. I am saying expectations should be realistic. It will not be the same as at age 15 or 16. And if the goal is to reduce bad breath caused by crowded teeth, the earlier it is done, the better. Now I return to something that may sound off topic, but is actually closely related, talking too much. I joke about this, but I am serious. Talking excessively dries the mouth. A dry mouth allows bacteria to grow. Bacterial growth leads to bad breath. In daily life, we have ears to listen and eyes to observe. We should listen more, observe more, and speak just enough. This reduces both verbal trouble and dry mouth. I sometimes joke that people suggest I tell others to talk less, but I say I am actually more afraid of quiet people cause when others talk more, I talk less, and my mouth stays less dry. That is a joke, of course. The principle remains, speak in moderation and keep the mouth from drying out. I will summarize here. because the longer I talk, the longer it becomes. Bad breath is serious, but it is not hopeless. Once we understand the mechanism, 85% from the mouth, especially the back region, will target it directly. Brush regularly and properly. Scrape the tongue. Keep the throat and tonsils clean and reduce inflammation. Drink enough water, and do not let the mouth dry out. Adjust habits related to alcohol, smoking, and strongly scented foods. If teeth are severely crowded, consider orthodontic treatment. And if there are underlying conditions such as reflux, diabetes, or kidney disease, treat those properly, because they also contribute to changes in breath odor. I will say this honestly, many people treat bad breath as something embarrassing or hard to talk about, and so they ignore it. But when it begins to affect work, relationships, and even marriage, only then do they realize it was never small. So if anyone listening feels they have symptoms, or notices symptoms in a loved one, do not feel ashamed. Treat it as a health issue. When handled properly, life becomes much lighter. Before we end, I want to return to something that may sound incidental, but is actually very closely connected: how to talk to people about bad breath. Many people ask me, should we point it out to family members? I will answer honestly, pointing it out is an art. If it is a close family member, a spouse, or a very close friend, then yes, it should be addressed. But doing it bluntly can easily cause emotional harm. I often suggest a gentler approach. Start with health-related concerns. For example, I've noticed you seem to have a dry mouth. Little, you might not be drinking enough water. Or, would you like to try a different toothpaste? I've heard this one cleans better. Or, why don't we schedule a routine dental checkup and have your gums checked while we're at it? In other words, guide the person towards solutions rather than throwing the label "you have bad breath" directly at them. When people feel they have a way out, they are much more willing to change. Now I return to how I usually conclude my programs. I never want to turn these talks into formal lectures. What I want you to understand is this: bad breath is not something shameful that needs to be hidden. It is a medical issue that can be solved if we take it seriously. Thank you for staying with me until this point. If you would like, you can leave a comment describing what kind of bad breath you experience: morning breath, post-meal breath, breath that worsens after talking for a long time, or breath that persists throughout the day. If possible, also mention whether you experience dry mouth, reflux, throat or sinus inflammation, and what your water drinking habits are like. When I read those comments, I will know how to guide you further in future episodes, or even create an entire program dedicated to your questions. If you find this content helpful, please consider sharing it with family members, friends, or colleagues, especially those who tend to avoid this topic out of embarrassment. Sharing is not about criticizing them, it is about helping them. Sometimes, just one person changing their habits, brushing properly, scraping the tongue, drinking enough water, treating gum inflammation, can make the entire atmosphere at home or in the workplace much more breathable. It sounds lighthearted, but it is true. If you find these discussions useful, you can support me in the simplest way. Follow the channel so you don't miss future episodes, or save this video so you can revisit it when needed. Often, we understand something the first time we hear it, but actually putting it into practice requires revisiting it again and again. And if you have a family member who, let me be direct, is an issue but doesn't dare talk about it, please do not share this content with a mocking attitude. Share it gently, with words like, "I thought this explanation was good. It's about oral health, confidence, and overall well-being. Maybe take a look." That's enough. People will understand on their own. I also want to thank those who leave comments below. When I read them, I see two very distinct groups. One group asks very specific questions. I have bad breath in the morning. What should I do? I brush my teeth, but still have bad breath. I have chronic throat inflammation. Could that be the cause? The other group does not ask questions. They simply confide. They say things like, "I'm very embarrassed. I don't dare stand close to other people." Or, "I love that person, but I can't tolerate it." Or, "My marriage has suffered because of this." Reading these messages, I realize that things we consider small can feel as heavy as a stone pressing on someone's chest. And that is exactly why I want to handle topics like this carefully and thoroughly, in it to entertain, but to give people a way forward. In the next episode, if you are interested, I will go deeper into practical steps, not just causes, but very concrete guidance. How to structure oral hygiene properly throughout the day, how to scrape the tongue without triggering nausea, how to drink water in a way that prevents dry mouth, when to suspect reflux, when to suspect sinus or throat problems, and when it is time to see a doctor, where to go, and which specialty to consult. I will explain these in a practical, doable way, not to sound sophisticated but to be useful. Now, this has truly become quite long. Thank you sincerely for listening all the way to the end. If you stayed until this point to listen to a difficult topic, that means you are already taking yourself seriously. Goodbye, and I look forward to seeing you again in the next episode.